folks. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Glenda. I'm a member of the Firestorm Collective, and we're so excited to host tonight's event in celebration of the book Upon Her Shoulders. Tonight's event is brought to you by Firestorm Books and Coffee, a 14-year-old worker-owned cooperative and radical bookstore in so-called Asheville, North Carolina. As many of us are settlers, immigrants, or descendants of those forcefully brought to this land, it is our collective responsibility to pay respect and recognize that this is the traditional territory of the eastern band of the Cherokee tribe. And I'm here because this land was occupied and because of histories of chattel enslavement. In recognizing that these physical and virtual spaces occupy colonized Aboriginal territories, and out of respect for the rights of Aboriginal people, it is our collective responsibility to critically interrogate the colonial histories and present-day implications of this, and to honor, protect, and sustain this land. Firestorm is a general interest bookstore, but we're also known for our curated mix of titles related to feminism, queerness, social movements, and other radical politics. We ship books all across the country, and if you haven't checked us out, our full catalog is available on our website, which I will drop links to in the chat. We are also historically a community event space. However, since the start of the pandemic, we've transitioned entirely to an online virtual event space, and we'll continue doing so until we feel safe to return to in-person. We host lots of events in collaboration with indie publishers, so I'll also drop a link to our community calendar in the chat. And a note for those attending in the live audience, there will be time at the end of tonight's conversation for a Q&A. You can also submit questions throughout the webinar. If you're interested in asking a question at any point, I encourage you to submit them throughout the discussion by using the Q&A function located at the bottom of your screen, if you're attending on Zoom, or in the comments if you're watching along with us on Facebook. And our speakers will do their best to respond. And now I'll introduce our speakers, who I'm so happy are here tonight. Marianne Jacobs is an associate professor and chairs American Indian Studies at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. She also holds a PhD in social welfare with an emphasis in child welfare policy from the University of Chicago. Cherry Maynor Beasley is a recognized expert in public health, culture of health, and education. She's devoted most of her 45-year career to rural, underserved populations. She's an active member of the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina. She's the current chair of the Department of Nursing at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke, located in a rural minority-majority community experiencing entrenched poverty. She serves as the inaugural Anna Belk Endowed Professor for Rural and Minority Health, is a fellow in the American Academy of Nursing, and a major in the Army Nurse Corps. Ulrike Wiethaus is Professor Emerita in the Department for the Study of Religions and in American Ethnic Studies at Wake Forest University. She was elected as the 2013 Community Solutions Fellow with the Institute for Public Engagement at Wake Forest University, received the Donald O. Schoonmaker Faculty Award for Community Service, and served as a Shively Faculty Fellow. All three are co-editors of another publication called American Indian Women of Proud Nations, Essays on History, Language, and Education. Now I'll pass it off to our speakers. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you so much, Glenda. We appreciate you all coming and attending this bookstore event for Upon Her Shoulders. I just wanted to mention really briefly the first book that we used, and I guess you guys can't see it, American Indian Women of Proud Nations. That is also the name of the organization that Cherry, Ulrike, and I worked with, and is still an ongoing organization here in North Carolina with many of the members from the Coharie tribe running it now. So both of these books go to, the proceeds from both of these books go to the American Indian Women of Proud Nations organization. And that was how we came together to begin writing these books. In fact, I think Ulrike told us in the last time we did one of these books talks that Miss Rosa Winfrey said, basically, you're going to write this book and get Cherry to do it too. So that's how we came together. We were working on conference organization for the project, and these books were basically a natural outcome of those conferences. The first book is compilation of academic articles by keynote speakers, primarily from the American Indian Women of Proud Nations conferences. And the second book is a compilation of stories, poetry, and interviews from women who were part of the organizing for the American Indian Women of Proud Nations conferences. So this is basically a tribute to those women in two different versions, the academic piece and now the stories and poetry book piece. So I'm going to start out by talking a little bit about the sections. We do have 3 different sections, and I'm going to be reading from the section that I more heavily edited, Getting Justice When There Was None. We really could have picked a lot of different groupings for these stories, and but the groupings that we had arose from the stories themselves. So there was something about justice that we felt, writ large, that was very important to everything that we put into this particular section. And the first thing I want to read a little bit from is Gail Simmons Cushion's section on it's a poem for the first part of this section. This poem appeared in the brochure for one of our conferences, and we knew that we wanted to have it as part of this book. And we were very fortunate to be able to keep in contact with Gail's family and have it appear here in the book. So I'm just going to read the last portion of it. The poem is called Patchwork Images. These images can be heard, felt, seen, smelled, or tasted in the communities where our Indian women live. She is a farmer, teacher, mother, factory worker, secretary, professional. Her hair is tinted, gray, short, long. She wears housecoats, breeches, Sunday dresses, power suits. Her face is made more beautiful with cosmetics. Her face is bare. Her skin is soft. Her skin is weathered by years of struggle, and tiny, tiny character lines frame her eyes. She smells like French perfume. She smells like Mother Earth. The responsibility of being Native woman was placed upon her shoulders at birth, blanketed like a patchwork quilt around her body. The last generation and the one before that hover around her, protecting her from bad spirits. The next generation and the one after that wait eagerly for her to share the woman's secret of creation. Now, with each one of the sections of the book, we wrote questions. And there's questions for Gail's poem. And the question says, Gail Simmons Cushion's poem describes all sorts of Native women. What images of Native women are engraved in your memories? How have those women inspired you? What sorts of women's secrets of the creation did they share with you? We put questions in the book because we really envisioned this book to be a workshop type of book, a book that you could sit down with others and ask these questions, get answers to these questions. Maybe these questions are going to be just for you, the reader, or what we really hope is that you'll be in conversation with family members, with people in your community that you like to read books with, people at your book club, people, extended members of family. That's how we envisioned the work of this book. The other section that I want to read from is a little bit out of Rosa Winfrey's section. Rosa was, again, the last person to chair the American Indian Women of Proud Nations while we were all actively working on those conferences. And I really wanted to read a little section about her time working in a store in Pembroke. And she starts on page 151. I've traveled a long path, and on that path, I learned how to overcome prejudices. People who say they do not have any prejudices, I just think they're wrong. I had prejudices, and I had to learn how to work through them. Good people from the Caucasian race helped me to do that. Education does not mean that you get it all within the space of four walls. Living in a white community was so strange to me. I learned how to interact with people who were not from my own tribe, people with other than relatives living in my home community. The only real contact I had growing up was the fact that I worked in that local general store run by Mr. Russell W. Livermore. I worked 4 years in that dress shop. I learned a lot there because almost all of my customers were Indian. I worked with 2 white ladies at the store, and I guess I also learned my prejudices in that setting. I was often hurt by my coworkers' remarks. They laughed at Indian people, especially Indian people who were not educated. It was just so hard to listen to those things, but I knew I had to work. So I just listened, and I tried to be as loving and as kind as I could to the people I served. That said, they were mostly Indian people. I also learned from our elders in the different communities around where I lived, 1 mile north of Pembroke. Until my time at the Livermores, I had not interacted with too many people except my relatives from other communities in Robeson County. So I learned a lot about our people just by working in that store. I was humbled. The elders talked a lot about our struggle as Indian people, and they would say it to me very openly, honestly. I learned to love them. I held them in high esteem. Many of them would come to the store to bring items from home and trade them for food or for clothing. The Livermores allowed them to do that. I thought that was very good and an honorable thing that they were permitted people to bring items and exchange them for the food they did not have. I learned so many things working there. I learned to respect the elders for what they shared with me. And they would do it in such a humble way. They taught me to respect others while respecting myself. It's so important to learn to respect others, other views, to respect what they bring to the table. Some of the elders would share with me that they'd went to the 1st or 2nd grade only. That touched me so deeply that they had never had the opportunity to go to school. It really made me appreciate the fact that I could go to school. And the question that we had for that particular section was, Rosa Winfrey wrote about how education changed her life. What sorts of power has knowledge given you? How would you learn to respect, how did you learn to respect others who were different from you? I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues, and I believe Cherry's going to read first.
Thank you, Marianne. And just to continue, the section of the book that I focused on the most is titled Make Yourself Useful, Child. Again, that theme emerged from all the different stories. And like Marianne said, actually, we could have not only come up with a lot of different themes, but almost every story that we collected could have been placed in every other division. So we looked at the language, and we looked at the thematic thing that the woman stressed in her interview, and how we came up with where to place it. One of the other things with the Make Yourself Useful Child is that we know that cultural systems actually help people develop a pattern of relationships, a sense of belonging. It helps women particularly to develop a sense of purpose, to explore their roles, and to define opportunities. We know that stories, and the stories we encounter in this book, many are by elders, but a lot are by youth as well, because we wanted to give the sense that making yourself useful is a theme that is common in American Indian women, and it's not only for the very young or the very old, but it's something that continues through our lifespan. And so we deliberately, you will see in each section something by a younger woman as well as one of the elders to whom we respect so highly. We also spent a lot of time in our interactions with the communities that we were serving with poetry, because poetry and dance speak so much of our interactions with each other and our building of relationships. So we also have a lot of poems in the book written by American Indian women. I'm going to read one by Madison York, who is a young woman who's a member of the Eastern Band tribe out in your own community and there in Nashville. So a very powerful statement of how she addressed herself and beginning to understand herself, and you'll read this. So her poem is called Questions for Creator. Sometimes I wonder what Creator thought when he created this nervous native child who was so unsure of the world he gifted. I think of his intent in giving me this endless mind, the one that kept me up at night, the endless loop of fear and joy and fear again. I wonder what he thought when he made me look less like the rest. The words, "you don't look native," being my definition. I ponder his purpose in instilling the healer's heart and making it feel so large that it could hold the universe. I request explanation in asking me to live in two worlds, in the midst of my tribe and in the eyes of society and those who made it. I ask his wisdom in placing me here. I want to help, but I'm not sure if I can walk both paths. Though I may never have these answers, my voice can no longer be quieted. Will to live by curiosity in that endless mind, being called to sing my ancestors' songs, even though I am not their mirror. Healer's heart beating rapidly, helping me to span the gap between the two worlds. This nervous native child asked by the Creator to speak with her people, hear the voice he has given me. So the questions we wanted to think about is we see in this poem how this young woman actually quickly moves from questioning to seeking wisdom, and seeking wisdom of how she can use the conflicts to improve herself as healer. So one of the questions that we were posing that may stimulate conversation is, what questions would you ask the Creator? And what thoughts do you think the Creator had when the Creator was making you? The next section I would like to read is also by one of the mothers of our organization, Miss Ruth Rebels. And it goes again, so in honoring our mothers, we wanted to read some of her. Miss Ruth, before this story, before I'm going to begin to read in the story, actually taught of how her mother actually had sacrificed for her to get an education, and how she had completed college at then the University of then it was Pembroke State College. And if you don't know, UNC Pembroke is the, I think, if not the only, one of the only Native American universities in the country, American universities in the country established by American Indians for American Indians. So it was there to educate our people and to develop teachers for our people. And so Miss Ruth was a trained educator. They had to leave the area for her husband to find work. And so she's talking now about how she was applying for a job in Greensboro, North Carolina. And she says, I remember sitting there with the administrator looking at my application. He was not saying anything. I sat there thinking that if I had my application back, I'd put white on it. I just knew that he would not hire me as an Indian. That was just the way it was. But I did get the job after all. It was the first experience in my life that made me say, Ruth, you can do it. Then she talks about how she learned from her students. I observed my students when they pronounced a word that I had mispronounced. Instead of correcting them, I would write down the word, and that night I would look it up. I told myself, Ruth, you better listen. You got a lot to learn. And then she talks about, I did develop a lot to learn, but I also developed courses in American Indian literature. I did not get to do everything, but my students did. You do not have to do it all, but you have to help others do more than you did. And then she talks about prejudices. She says, one day at lunch, a teacher stated that Blacks were innately inferior to whites. I got out of my seat and stood up. I could not believe what I was hearing. Shortly after that, the Guilford American Indian Association came into being. I left teaching to become the first executive director. I loved teaching and the students, but I saw an opportunity to do more. Through teaching drama and literature, both to American Indians and Black literature, I was gradually become more aware of the broader aspects of inequity. I recognized the larger picture. I started looking back at my own life, growing up in a segregated community and lacking opportunities. She goes on to her story and talks about how she actually helped create working space and making space for women who needed her help. And then so the questions that we talk about with Miss Ruth's story acknowledges that, and she said about the power of women to act courageously when confronted with unjust social structures. In what ways have society structures appeared to hinder your life that actually moved you forward? I think all of us can think of those times in our own lives. And again, maybe a great conversation starter. The last section I would like to read is from one of our young women, Mardella Sunshine. She actually begins her story in talking about the fact that she is half Indigenous, American Indian, and then she's actually half from an Italian family, and grew up outside of the Indian community in Philadelphia. She says, I was named after my maternal grandmother, whom we call Mama. And as a child, I always knew that my family was different from my friends, but I did not really understand the full weight of these differences. I was a member of the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina and a first-generation Italian American. My native and Italian cultures were fused into my daily life in ways that I did not realize or understand until later in life. Again, how do we move forward in these cultures we're growing with? And then she talks about how she deliberately made the choice without the knowledge of her family to return to Pembroke, UNC Pembroke, to come to school. And she says, first, my people were not exactly the most welcoming. I had to prove myself as a non-Robeson County born Lumbee and as a mixed heritage Lumbee. I did not attend local high school, and she goes on and talks about being different. But she says, my Mima spent much time pouring into me what it meant to be Indian and what it meant to be Lumbee, that I was shocked that so many young people did not know simple things about Lumbee history and culture. My Mama explained to me that growing up in Philly, I had to know everything to defend myself, to explain myself, and to educate others. My siblings, cousins, and I were always the 1% in our schools. If you grow up surrounded by people who are exactly like you, you do not have to constantly fight those little battles. You breathe, eat, live, and breathe your culture daily without realizing that it's unique as part of your large tribal culture. She says, when I arrived, many people thought that it was not important to teach Lumbee culture because it was being lived. During the decade I have lived in Pembroke, I've seen a cultural shift, an awakening to what has happened. Again, we listened to what has been her stories and her questions that she would have asked people to address as a young woman. She's an example of a young woman who's learned to make herself useful. As is true with other women in this section, her willingness to seek, to preserve, and to serve others has led her into leadership. What surprised her and heartfelt needs propelled her to move through her own journey to make herself useful. And what has led you through your own journey to make yourself useful? The last thing I would like to point out is that each of our sections end in something called in closing. In our work with American Indian Women of our Proud Nations, we often created sacred space for each other and space for each other to express who they were. And we gathered those notes as we went through. We just put a large piece of wallpaper up at the back, and people could take sticky notes and they could write anything they wanted to. And we have collected those over the years. And we have shared some of these in our book with you. So contemplating words of wisdom by our women elders is what we have titled this. And I just want to read 3 from this section. Create space for children, one said, especially children that you did not give birth to. Another said, tell your stories and share them with the youth. Dance and sing with them. And then finally, do not ever forget your past. Carry it with you daily. And so I will turn it over to my beloved colleague, Ulrike.
Thank you, Sherry. Thank you, Mary Ann. And thank you, Glenda. And thank you, all of you friends who are out there. We can't see you, but we are glad you are sharing this evening with us. So welcome. And my name is Ulrike Wiethaus. I'm German, and I'm co-editor and collaborator with Sherry and Mary Ann for ever before all of us had wrinkles, right? It has been a while, I think over 20 years. So it has been a good journey, and I'm so pleased that Firestorm has us. And I also want to thank our amazing editors at Blair Publishing, who saw value in our collections of poems and stories, and were the best publisher we could ask for. So a big shout out to our supporters at Blair Publishing. So as you saw, all 3 of us took care of one particular section, reading the stories. The themes came to us, the characteristics of Native women that we found that were always community oriented, never ever not being activists, I would say, in so many ways, visible and invisible. And then, as Mary Ann points out, the strong sense of justice and working towards justice when justice was hard to get by because the system was so tilted against Native people's rights in the past. And I'm sure we can have a conversation what the situation looks like today. So in my section sort of came to us as we were reading the stories and the poem, and we call it spirituality. And that's a little bit of an effort to build a bridge to non-Native communities. As a matter of fact, we called it spirit medicine rather than spirituality, but we are using the word somewhat to clarify it's not about religion. It's about experience. And as we read through the stories, 3 themes really came towards us. And you heard those themes already in the poem that Mary Ann read about creation's mysteries related to women. There are also creation's mysteries related to children, to men, to elders. But for now, you know, the poem speaks to those related to women. And also Sherry's poem spoke very strongly about Madison York's strong sense of connection to the creator and engaging in a very, very searching conversation with creator. And so, as Sherry said earlier, these themes weave all these themes: justice, community activism, and spirituality are in every single story. And it's very hard to not isolate them the way we did for the sake of perhaps easing our audience into the rich worlds of the book. So, spirit, medicine, and spirituality. The three of us identified a number of themes that seem to occur over and over again. And one is, as you already heard, the essence of Native spirituality. Perhaps it's one of the most stereotyped aspects of indigeneity really around the world, where you have New Age takes on spirituality, or you have the old trope of Christian paganism and the heathen that need to be quickly converted to Christianity. But when you study the essence of spirit medicine in the stories of the women, we find that the essence is really, number one, the direct connection to creator. And that connection is something that is taught. It's not something that we can just pick up randomly, like we could pick up our book here, but it's transmitted from generation to generations. It's modeled. It's learned by observing elders and family members. So it's a lived experience that is passed on, and that is finding its way into the stories and the poem. Another theme you already heard before, and that is that spirit medicine is always aware of the ancestors. Spirit medicine doesn't happen in the vacuum of the here and now, but as you work to keep alive and vibrant your connection to creator, at the same time as a Native woman, we learned is you keep alive your connection to the ancestors, and that is essential. And that is perhaps something that we heard in previous book presentations is bringing up very painful issues for non-Native people who can barely connect to ancestors 2 generations in the past. And thirdly, as you also heard, spirit medicine only is life-giving and is alive if it's connected to the community. So it's never an individual journey where you sit by yourself on a mountaintop and meditate. It's you bring everybody with you and you bring yourself back to everybody. So to illustrate those 3 points, I would like to close our introduction before we open it up to our conversation with all of you with a short reading and the question we came up with by a colleague of ours, an elder, a member of the Lumbee tribe, also Kim Pivia. And in our contributor section, Kim describes herself as, I quote, hope dealer, Native American warrior for social and emotional justice, alchemist, honors, circles, and paradox, love activator, challenger, elder, and more on her website, kimpivia.org. So Kim gifted us with an autobiographical story she wrote, and she titled it Spirit Medicine, which we then asked for permission to use for this section. And I just want to read one piece of the story. If you buy the book, you can read the remainder of the story. But it marks a turning point for Kim and her work. And it starts in a fairly innocuous way. at this time, Kim is still living in Florida. And as she says, I know I tell crazy stories, but I can only tell my stories the way I experience them. So, and then she says, here is a show me story. So she begins. One day, while still living in Florida, I was driving to the beach. I always parked in the same place, maybe within a few parking spaces in the same general location. I put my blanket down in the same place. The regular people I would talk to always were there. I had been praying for a partner or some other shift. I wanted something to change. As I was driving to the beach that day, I could not find my spot. I knew inside my spirit that something was going to be different that day. I kept driving up the beach and I ended up 4 miles north of where I normally park. I found a new spot. I put my blanket down and I knew and could feel energetically that something was going to happen. I'm thinking that I'm going to meet my guy. I'm like, yeah, my man's around the corner. I'm thinking it is going to be something amazing. So I'm sitting there, the beach is packed. I mean, packed. And I started crying. An overwhelming sense of loneliness came over me that I've never felt before. I felt like I could go drown myself in the ocean. It was that deep. I knew the feelings were not mine. It was just a deep sense of loneliness. It was like a collective sense of loneliness. I began to have this thought that this loneliness was not about me. It was a question and answer session of some spiritual place that was not mine, but I was sitting here with all these people around me. I wondered who would be open to a conversation. So we think this illustrates how to really live fully in conversation with Creator on a daily basis. And the question we designed for all of you out there, individually and in your communities, is as such. Author and life coach Kim Pivia describes a life-changing spiritual experience that leads her from a personal quest for love to a deep sense of shared human loneliness, and from there to discovering a way to connect people in a spirit of love. And if you continue reading the story, you see how that question and answer with the Creator leads her to turn around her business and to create something entirely new to connect people. Her journey to insight and action is grounded in a complete trust in her intuition, inspiration, and heart. Can you recall a time in your life where you were equally guided by your intuition? What happened? And what were the stages of your journey to insight and the renewed connection to others on a spiritual level? In the present moment, what challenge in your life would be easier if you engaged in the process of listening to your intuition in a beautiful, natural setting? So there are many, many more stories, many more questions, many more words of wisdom and poems in the book. And we would hope that if you read it, that you gain strength and support through the many voices that are collected in this book. And you have been very patient listening to us for about 40 minutes. And with this brief introduction, we would like to open it up to any comments and questions you would like to share with us. And thank you so much for being with us. And Glenda, I think you are the moderator, right?
Yeah, so we are taking questions. I actually had a few questions, if y'all didn't mind. My first question is, how did you all approach contributors and gather the content for the book?
Well, we already knew all the contributors, most of them, before we got started with gathering all of them. In some cases, women wrote their own, as all the poetry is written by the women themselves. And in some cases, they wrote their own sections, like Mardella wrote her own section. But in other cases, we did interviews, and Cherry did a lot of the interviewing, as did Ulrike, and I interviewed Kim Pevia, actually, for her section. So we went out and actually had a discussion and tape recorded it, and then had it transcribed, and eventually it became the section that you're reading in the book.
Yeah, so it was really in conversation with our contributors, and the basis were 10 years of the annual conference that was started by the two women elders, Miss Ruth and Miss Rosa, and I was very honored to support them. And then I should also say that our Blair editor had a wonderful story and an interview actually with a Cherokee language expert and a very well-known Cherokee writer, Annette Sonu Clapsaddle, was gracious together with the Cherokee elder Marie Junaluska to contribute their interview and story to our book. So that was one thing our Blair Publishing helped us with. But yeah, it was a long collaboration. It took several years actually to also put it together and work with our contributors. And Sherry likes to tell the story about Miss Ruth. Maybe you want to share that, Sherry? With Miss Ruth and the interview and how poignant it was. That
so Miss Ruth was, we allowed them to decide what context they wanted to be interviewed in. So not only did they want to be interviewed, or did they want to write it, or how did they want to do it? And so we interviewed, I was privileged to interview Miss Ruth, and she chose the Guilford County American Indian Museum downtown that she had been very instrumental in helping establish, but at that time, after having retired, she was a major volunteer there. And so at the same time, when she was quote unquote retired, she was the chairperson of the North Carolina Commission of Indian Affairs. And so held a very powerful position in the state, within the state government, about Indian and Indian relations and affairs. And so I had the privilege of a 4.5-hour interview. And we would take breaks and walk around and look at the art, and then that would cause her to think of another part of the story she wanted together. And so I think I have 3 cassette tape interviews of that interview. And so kind of then writing the story that was significant. But what was important about that for us as women was that it was the last interview that Miss Ruth ever did. She died 2 weeks later. And so her children, we had to break it to them that she had granted us this interview. And again, of course, allowed them to listen to the tapes and before we even transcribed them, so that they could make sure that they wanted them transcribed. And so just respecting their wishes as we were moving through this process and helping to be recognizing the wonderful tribute that their mother had given to society, and were they willing to share this one more time? And they were both extremely gracious in doing so. So it was a major. We were even walking around the museum one time, the electrical storm came up and the lights went out, and I'm thinking, okay, she may want to stop it. Nah, she didn't. She said, we'll just walk around and talk while it's coming back on. Okay, that was Miss Ruth. That was our Miss Ruth. And our Miss Rosa, they were like, she said, if Miss Rosa said you were going to do it, you did it. But the other thing I want to say about the work for me was when we first started, when Miss Rosa and Miss Ruth told us we were going to write a book, we were going to write one book. And so we started collecting information and stories and interviewing people, and then realized, well, no, we really had two completely different types of books. And as we worked together as allies in this work, and we grew and changed. And so we wanted, it became important for us to share our experiences with asking each other questions and, you know, sharing stories from, as you will, excuse me, you will hear, it's important for us to, we may be telling a story and Ulrike would say, now, when did that happen to your family? Oh, it was my grandfather's third cousin, twice removed. But it was the reality was, it maybe somebody I never actually met. They died in the 1800s, but it's a story that goes forward in my family and helps us develop into who we are and builds community with us. And so it was even upon those women's shoulders that we stand, and that we started talking about who were the women in our lives who did that for us. That was probably a long answer to your question, but.
No, it was perfect. It really sounds like this book was a labor of love for everybody involved, and it's just a really beautiful collaboration. I had another question. This one's kind of like a longer one and has like 2 sections to it, but with depictions of Indigenous people in American history throughout various forms of media, like movies and TV being like extremely problematic since their inception, how did that like affect your own self-perceptions or the people around you while growing up? And are there currently any contemporary forms of media depicting Native women that you feel are authentic and should be given more attention?
Jerry, I'm going to let you go first on that one. It's a long one.
And so can you repeat the first part? Because the second part was really the hooker for me, about modern images of American Indian women. I would struggle with that. I mean, I think all of us who are living in tribal communities or interact with tribal communities have our and mothers and grandmothers who are that for us and our young women. It's interesting because it's not an image that sells. And so if I look at the mass media, and that's the other reason I think this book was important to us, is to, like with Miss York's poem, you know, my eyes are bright, a brilliant green. And most people have said to me all my life, well, you don't look Native, you don't look like an Indian. But so that was an important part for us. And we did want to give people a glimpse of what American Indian women are like today. That we're, one of the poems that I don't know that we still, you know, we're still here, is an important piece of, you know, we have not gone away as tribal people and as American Indian women. And, you know, in those matrilineal societies, we still have that very important role. And how then do we communicate that to others, and also support each other's to claim our stories? And so I think that's how I'm going to take a stab at that, Mary Ann.
I think that a lot of the issues that we talk about in the book really demonstrate identity issues for American Indians in the Southeast. And there's another questions about why we chose the Southeast. And it's because that's where the American Indian Women of Proud Nations was focused. We were trying to get to every tribe in the state of North Carolina, and hoping to branch out from there to Virginia and South Carolina as well. So we're looking at tribal communities that don't get a lot of attention, and still are, you know, even though they're not in the spotlight, a national spotlight, they definitely are still Native populations that are important. So yeah, that's why we chose the Southeast, and that's why the identity issues are, you know, common to all the tribes in the Southeast.
I think it's also interesting that several of the women in the book, like Adela Sunshine, wasn't raised in the Southeast. Her tribal community, the Lumbee community, is from the Southeast, and that's who she identified with. But you spent most of her childhood until she became college age, away from, you know, maybe visiting in the area. But it was her grandmother who lived with her in Philly that actually taught her her native ways. We have another piece in the book by Mary Ann Elliott, who was raised in Newport News, Virginia, and lives in Arlington, Virginia now, and has not lived a bunch of her life at all in the Southeastern communities, so, you know, and we saw the same themes. The other thing I think we saw in and we see when we're going to conferences, because we've had them in urban settings as well as tribal communities, is that women who were living outside, away from tribal communities, really wanted to talk about their stories. They really wanted to share stories. So Miss Ruth spent most of her, pretty much 100% of her adult life in Greensboro. Miss Rosa in Charlotte. So Miss Barbara in Charlotte. So it wasn't, it's not just women who are in the middle of their tribal communities who need to hear their stories and to have their stories shared.
I have one last question. Since this is a book that is so much about preserving oral history and tradition, do you think that in the future you would continue to work with these contributors and possibly work on something with them in the future?
We do have another book in process. We're going to revisit the first book and do an extended version, hopefully updating the research that the contributors were doing before. We'll have some new information in there, but we're still hitting on those same themes that the American Indian Women of Proud Nations were really working around, and that's education, community, family, health, and spirituality. And I think economic development. So you'll still see the same themes in the new edition.
And we're still collecting work. So if anybody in here would like to share their story or, you know, be interviewed, we would love to have that, because one of the whole pieces, I think, that are the lady who wrote the forward, Mary Kim, one of the things that she actually encourages us is cherish all who bless you with their stories. And I think we have been blessed with stories, and we are glad to be able to provide a forum where that we could do this. I mean, we could start tonight telling other stories that we haven't encountered in the book from our own. As a matter of fact, we had a conversation just earlier today, the three of us, and we were talking about something that my colleagues hadn't heard me share before. I mean, so I do hope that there's other women of all cultural groups who are willing to do this, because sometimes the voices of women is, especially in today's society, maybe, I don't know what a good word is. It's not, they're not looked at always in a positive light. And as the, you know, the ones who are the cradles of the world.
Yeah,
I maybe want to talk about that.
no, I would also like to add to Sherry and Marianne's comment that, you know, we were the first generation really of women organizing the American Indian Women of Proud Nations Conference. And that was a long time ago, but the conference is still going. It's a nonprofit. And so I really want to do a shout out for the conference and invite all of you to go to their website. They are still working. The group is working on another conference. And a lot of our authors are writers in their own right and activists in their own right. So Glenda, if you want to see what's happening next, it's like a tree branches out, you know, and there are all these different branches through the voices of the women who have contributed to our book, right? Continuing writing their poetry and their stories and newspaper articles and novels and etc. So our book is just one little piece of a much larger patchwork and tapestry.
Well,
And I also, and maybe sadly to say, but some of the things that these women had experienced in their lives and the struggles, even with, you know, hope, you know, being denied opportunities, is still going on, and the racism is still there. And so minority women particularly are struggling in this country and in this world. And so you know, that's why the conference is so important to us, that this organization continues to grow and thrive. And the whole idea for starting it, Ulrike can talk more about that, was that actually how do we build capacity so that in these areas, so that women can, it's not a one shot or a small group of people, but then it is a groundswell of women. And it was actually our young women who started saying to us, tell us more stories. Tell us more, you know, we want to be in more talking circles. We want to be more, you know, we want to have hangout time with the 90-year-old women. I mean, how do we do that? And so we found the importance of giving sacred space and providing sacred space for each other.
Well, it is about to be 8 o'clock and it looks like we don't have any more questions from the audience. But I just want to say thank you all so much for having this conversation and sharing space with us tonight. And to our attendees, I really recommend picking up the book. It is beautiful and it is such a special collaboration. Yeah, I look forward to seeing that future update of the other publication. And just thank you again so much for all the work that you each do. And to our attendees in the audience, you will receive a link to tonight's recording. So if you want to share this with a friend or pass it on to someone you know who signed up but missed it, you'll get that in your email very soon. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Glenda, for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Glenda, and thank you to everybody in the audience for joining us.
Yes, thank you, Glenda, and we hope continued success at Firestorm Books.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Okay, good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.